Welcome back to The Big Picture. Many people are still concerned about radiation from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant traveling across the Pacific and onto the West Coast, contaminating air and water and fish along the way. But there's potential for a much more dangerous nuclear disaster that's already sitting on our West Coast on the Columbia River in Hanford, Washington. Hanford was where the majority of plutonium for nuclear weapons was produced during the Cold War. And it's where the first 3 nuclear reactors on Earth were built. More than 67 metric tons of plutonium were made at Hanford, and it's home to nearly 60% by volume of all the high-level radioactive waste stored in the entire United States, with nearly 80% of the Department of Energy's inventory of spent nuclear rods stored just 400 yards, 4 football fields away from the Columbia River, which is the second largest river in the United States, by the way, behind the Mississippi. And according to the state of Washington, right now there are 177 tanks holding 53 million gallons of the highest level radioactive waste in the United States, and 67 of those tanks have already leaked over 1 million gallons of this particular highly radioactive waste. For more on the threat posed by the Hanford site, we're joined now by Kevin Kamps, radioactive waste watchdog for Beyond Nuclear, and still with us are Sarah Badawi and Alex Lawson. And so, Kevin, welcome back to the program.
Tom.
So, why don't more people know about Hanford?
Well, it's a 70-year-old problem at this point, so folks out there certainly know about it. But, you know, the nuclear power establishment and the nuclear weapons establishment in this country like to keep things quiet. And so it's a chronic problem that now is getting worse with these sudden surges of leaks at Hanford.
Yeah, and if it gets into the Columbia River, I guess the biggest population center downstream is Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, that's right.
Are people
and it's getting in the environment. It's in the soil. It's in the groundwater, as you said. And now there's been this spurt of leaks just in recent weeks, and it's very disconcerting.
I remember back in the 70s when John Goffman was running the Union of Concerned Scientists, as I recall, him talking about how, as I recall, it was 1 ounce. It might have been 1 pound of plutonium, if properly distributed, is enough to kill every human being on Earth, because it basically just takes 1 atom of plutonium to be, you know, in your body in the right place, and bang. I mean, it's the most toxic substance on Earth, and there's 80 tons of it.
Yeah, it's just a mind-boggling amount that was separated at Hanford for use in nuclear weapons. And so what you've got is this liquid high-level radioactive waste, and there's also sludges on the bottom of the tank.
Filled with plutonium.
Well, it's the byproduct from plutonium extraction, so there probably is a good deal of plutonium in this wastewater and sludge. But you've got things like radioactive cesium-137, strontium-90, in just vast amounts in this liquid and sludge waste byproduct. Right.
What have whistleblowers, Kevin, already told us about flawed designs and safety protocols from Hanford?
Oh, you've got so much going on. You've got workers getting sick, being knocked unconscious by the toxic vapors coming out of these tanks.
This was just in the last couple of weeks, wasn't it?
It's in recent months. And what's just happened now is this leak from a double-walled tank. So this is a new thing out there. There have been lots of leaks from single-walled tanks out there, but now the double-shelled tanks are leaking. And so there's a desperate urgency to get the leaking tanks emptied into brand-new tanks. And that's not happening at this point. So the whistleblowers out there have called attention to things like the solidification plant. It's called the vitrification plant at Hanford. It's to turn the liquid waste into glass, vitrify it. It is years behind schedule. It is billions of dollars over budget, just, you know, complete incompetence going on out there. And that's why these liquids remain the threat that they are of leakage.
And you said we're seeing the impacts in the area around it. How is the Hanford area itself so contaminated that it's, you know, essentially dangerous? And is that radiation traveling?
It's a very dangerous place. In addition to the storage tanks, which are giant in size, they're million-gallon storage tanks. What you've also got is the aftermath of just really criminal behavior by first the Atomic Energy Commission way back in the day, and more recently the Department of Energy. And they did this at all the nuclear weapons sites, where they would just dispose of wastes into the environment. They would dig pits, unlined pits, and dump the waste down in there. So
radioactive waste?
Yeah, radioactive waste into pits. But that happened also in Idaho. It's happened at other sites in the country.
Are there private corporations involved in this? Is this the sort of thing like, rebuilding Iraq where you bring in Halliburton and they don't quite, or whatever, not to pick on one company, but you get my point.
It's a huge issue. That goes all the way back to the 1940s when private companies were hired to run these facilities on behalf of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and now the U.S. Department of Energy.
So is part of the problem here the profit motive? Is it, companies doing a half-assed job just because they want to save money? Because
they can, and then the harassment of whistleblowers is just, terrible. And whistleblowers have been vindicated in court and gotten, settlements of $4.3 million. The whistleblower was a top senior worker in the contracting company who was calling attention to the vitrification plant failures and was fired and silenced.
So the vitrification is being done by a private for-profit corporation.
Right. Contractors are hired, and it's gone horribly, and that's why we're still stuck with these tanks of liquid waste with nowhere to go.
Right. Before I toss this to our panel, what's the event that Beyond Nuclear is putting on tomorrow?
We have a commemoration of Chernobyl plus 30 years and Fukushima plus 5 years. The Chernobyl 30th anniversary just passed on April 26th. We have world-class scientists who are going to speak here in Washington at the Goethe Institute tomorrow night. We've got Timothy Mousseau, a biologist who has done scores of peer-reviewed studies of wildlife and ecology at Chernobyl and Fukushima. We've got Dr. Vladimir Vertaleski, a pediatric oncologist who has found just horrific results in the human population near Chernobyl. And we have Dr. Yuri Hiranuma from Physicians for Social Responsibility, who's now seeing just terrible impacts on the populations around Fukushima, especially children.
Wow. So, Sarah, Alex, any questions for Kevin or comments or thoughts so far on this?
I mean, one question I have for you, nuclear waste is not going to get any safer. From a policy perspective, what is the path forward? Obviously, we have to fix this problem, but if we're going to continue to have nuclear energy and have these sites around our country, what is, in your mind, the best way to approach this going forward with a long-term plan in mind?
Well, we have to shut down nuclear power plants which generate high-level radioactive waste, which is deadly forever. And instead of, sensible solutions like that, let's cap the problem, we're seeing unprecedented risk-taking. So, for example, the U.S. Department of Energy, working with its Canadian counterparts, is talking about transporting liquid high-level radioactive waste by truck from Canada to South Carolina. That's never been done in U.S. or North American history. If there were to be a wreck with one of those shipments on the roads and its contents released, that would be a catastrophe for that local area.
Wow.
So we've kind of backed ourselves into a corner here. Are there any good solutions for any of this?
Well, this, as Senator Wyden has said just recently, this is an emergency situation.
The Hanford
The highest urgency, we need to build new tanks and empty the contents of these leaking tanks into brand new tanks.
So we've got functionally our own Fukushima going on right here, but nobody's talking about it.
Folks are talking about it out there, but can they get the attention of the U.S. federal government and the U.S. Department of Energy to do what's needed to prevent a greater catastrophe from unfolding?
Yeah. Alex, at what point do we admit that nuclear power isn't safe and that the way that we've been doing nuclear weapons is pretty stupid?
As you know, I'm an optimist. There are a few things that actually sometimes keep me awake at night when I learn about them. And Hanford was one of them. I got lost on the Wikipedia article about it. And the scale is basically, it's impossible to understand just how much highly radioactive waste is here. They built it on the river so that it would stay cool, so they could keep building plutonium in the midst of the Cold War. And the priorities were, they were looking down the barrel of Soviet nuclear weapons. But there's a word that was said before that I think is really frightening, and it's forever. The radioactivity from this waste has to be dealt with by us forever. So the only solution is to pour it from one container into another container. That's not a solution. That's just moving it into a container that doesn't leach out and kill people.
Yeah, the pyramids are only 3,000 years old, and they're disintegrating. It's like...
Forever. That's the scary word.
Yeah, it really and truly is. So how is this technology still considered cutting edge, Kevin, when it's a 70-year-old technology and it has, the nuclear technology in general? And it doesn't seem to have cleaned itself up since then.
Well, some good news is that reactors are closing in the United States. So just recently we learned that Entergy Nuclear, one of the biggest nuclear utilities, will close permanently its Fitzpatrick atomic reactor on the Lake Ontario shore of New York next January.
Right.
And then Pilgrim near Boston, they're saying mid-2019, and I think the environmental groups around there are going to do something to make it happen sooner if they can. So that's the good news. But you know, this establishment, this nuclear industry government complex is very powerful politically. It's got a huge lobby, campaign contributions. They're still seeking, you know, huge subsidies from the federal government, from state ratepayers. So they're trying to keep these old reactors alive. They're going to make more radioactive waste. They're even trying to get money from the federal taxpayer to build what they're calling small modular reactors at huge expense. So these are just wealth concentration mechanisms, and they're used to it. They've been doing it for decades. They want to keep doing it for decades more.
As long as they've got Price Anderson, we're the ones on the hook.
Yeah.
We have about a minute left. Sarah, Bernie was famous in Vermont for fighting Vermont Yankee and finally getting the thing shut down. He really worked on this. Do you see, you know, with the Bold Progressive, the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, your organization, is nuclear power part of the Bold Progressive agenda, or ending nuclear power, or should it be, or not?
You know, certainly not officially. It hasn't been something we've worked on, but I think it draws attention to a bigger issue that Kevin just raised, which is the campaign finance problem, right? We need to figure out the solution to decoupling our governance from corporate incentives, right? So as long as these corporations have the power to influence our politicians, problems like this will continue.
Yeah. Yeah, and Kevin, would you agree with that?
I got arrested with Granny D on John Muir's birthday in the year 2000, the day before Earth Day, to get, you know, corrupting corporate money out of environmental policy in the United States.
Yeah.
And so I absolutely agree.
Yeah, Doris Haddock. I went on one of the walks with her, and she's passed away now, but she was just an extraordinary woman. And there's so much that anyway. Kevin Kamps, Sarah Badawi, Alex Lawson, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.